All right. And welcome back to Northpointe Plus. I am Chris Sullivan, and I am here, or you can call me Kristen. You can call me Kristen Sullivan.
Which would you like to be called?
You
don't know.
I like Chris better, but I told everybody that I was going to try to go by my birth name. And so then, I was telling everybody to call me Kristen. And I'm going to tell you, when they say Kristen, I'm like,
That's not me.
I know. So I might just tell everybody to stick with Chris.
Well, you have actually now on the podcast. So it's safe.
That's official.
That's good. We have been trying to call you Kristen. We're trying to make the change.
So thanks to everybody for trying to help me out. I didn't know what I wanted in life.
Yeah, now you know.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm here with our lead pastor, Rick Rubel, and we are on episode 134.
That's a lot of episodes.
That's
like 2.5 years.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And kudos to everybody who's been listening.
Yeah. We don't talk about this very much, but it really is fun for me when I look and see what the numbers are in terms of people who watch. When we first started, we said, you know what? If like 20 people watch, that's probably, it would be worth it. And we've consistently, there's between 60 and 80 people that watch during the week right afterwards, and then people that watch after that as well. And fun stories about people who start to come to Northpointe and then go back and listen to all the podcasts, listen to the sermons and watch the podcast to catch up. And so that's cool. Yeah.
And we say it at the end of the episode, but just so you guys remember, you can watch it through Northpointe Plus on YouTube. You can watch it through the app. Can you also listen on Spotify?
Yes.
Spotify?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Sylvia is nodding her head. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There are lots of different ways that you can do that.
Okay.
And so,
But the video, you get the video on YouTube.
YouTube. Right. Yep.
But you can listen, you can watch, you can join in, you can laugh at us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so much more interesting visually.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we could juggle and everything. Yeah.
Excellent. So this past week was an amazing week. It was an incredible celebration. What happened?
Well, Sunday was Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, and Friday night. I was thinking today we didn't do a podcast with Larry about Friday night, and Friday night. I had several people say to me Sunday, "Oh, we missed you Friday night at the Good Friday service." And just so you know, I was there. Deb and I were actually in the nursery holding babies so that their parents could be in the service, so Jenna could be in the service as well. And it was really fun. It just was fun to hold a baby for an hour.
Yeah.
And there's if ever you want to do that, talk to Jenna. You can help do that so that other people can enjoy the service, parents can enjoy the service. And if you got little guys, there's great people taking care of your kids.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's a wonderful treat. I serve in 4th and 5th grade in Merge, and I absolutely love it. They are hilarious. If your kids are in 4th and 5th grade, they make fun of me. They crack me up. We hang out. We have a great time. I love it. But I do want to say a shout out really quick because I said that I would. Shout out to our worship team because Friday and Sunday was just amazing worship. Like I just felt so filled by the Spirit.
Yeah.
It was incredible listening to everyone else worship too together.
Yes. What service were you in?
Third service.
Third service. Yeah, third service. It was really interesting because usually, I want to say too, shout out, whatever. We said early on, if you're able to, the 9:45 service will probably be the biggest. And so if you can go at 8:30 or 11, that'd be great. Well, the way it happened was the number of people were the largest at 11 o'clock, second largest at 8:30, and third largest at 9:45. But the people at 9:45 were almost, a high percentage of them were people who aren't typically here on a Sunday. So it was a different kind of dynamic at that service because people were like, yeah, what do we do here? It just was really interesting. But third service was very full, very responsive. First service was very full and very responsive. It just was really, really fun.
Yeah.
And the band did a great job.
They did. They did some things that were unexpected. And do you want to?
Yeah, it was really, really cool. Right before the service, one of the band members came up to me and said, "Why are we changing positions?" Because we had talked about it before, and I said, "Oh, because it's unexpected. This whole series has been unexpected." And Jamie and I had talked about it, and just said it would be a really cool thing for people to see how great our musicians are, because so many of them can play multiple things. And so they moved. I think everybody moved at some point to another area,
Right.
just to try and physically mix stuff up. And for service, we had light problems. So we just had a techno glitch with the lighting, and so it was dark, and then it was all light, and then it was dark, and lots of unexpected things. But we had a great day. It was really, really cool to see how it all came together. Wasn't sure how, you never know when you plan if it's going to be what you thought it would. But I felt like after the service was done, it was a really special Easter celebration. Focus on Jesus, focus on how that impacts us, and great worship along with that.
Right. And you did kind of touch on it, but Friday night I felt like was the same too, because we did have a different band up there, and it was a different feel too. I think it was very intimate. You're more of a music person than I am, so I'm sure you could explain it in better words. But I felt like just the whole intimacy of Friday night and Larry speaking too really kind of got our hearts ready for contemplation and then just this celebration on Sunday.
Yeah, and I don't know if people made the connection or not, but I know Friday night finished with a song that left Jesus in the tomb. And then that same song is what started things on Sunday morning with the resurrection.
Cool. Yeah. I do have a friend on the inside who let me know what was happening. So
nice.
But it was cool to see that of how he was ending in the grave, and then you had this, waiting period over the weekend, and I just felt so excited Sunday waking up in a way that I really haven't felt probably in all of my life, of just how this Holy Week God was doing so many amazing things in me, and just having Good Friday service and letting that carry through to Easter Sunday. I know for me personally, it felt like this just huge celebration and party, and I was just so happy to be here.
Yeah, it was cool. God's at work, and it was fun.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, so there was actually a cool thing that you wanted to talk about, so I wanted to pass this over to you. I didn't know this, so I'm glad that you brought this up. So why aren't Passover and Easter synced up on the dates?
Yeah, what's funny is this actually came out of a conversation I had this morning with Jake. His wife, Ashley, said, why aren't Passover and Easter the same? And Jake said, they are. Yeah. And she said, no, they're not. Passover's a few weeks away. And so Jake came in and asked me that question, and I said, they are, aren't they? So I learned a couple of things. We talked about it, did a little research, and what I learned was that, first of all, I didn't know this, that Passover is tied to a date on the Jewish calendar. So it's not the same day of the week. Passover is not always on Thursday or Friday. It could be on a Monday or a Tuesday or whatever. I didn't know that. And so historically what happened was, in the first few centuries, Christians in different places celebrated the resurrection, celebrated what we call Easter on different days, just based kind of on where they were and what they thought. And so in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, Constantine was who called that council together. Council comes together, and they really met together to deal with an issue of heresy that was going on at that point in time. But they talked about some other things too. So this council was made up of religious leaders from all over, people that everybody looked to, trusted in terms of their perspective on things. And they ultimately made a decision to tie Easter celebrations, the resurrection celebrations, to one specific time, and to do that on a Sunday, not have it tied to Passover, and they separated it from the Jewish calendar, which is really interesting because they could have connected it to the Sunday after Passover, but they chose not to because they actually wanted to distance Christianity from Judaism.
Okay.
Which is like, that's crazy because they're completely tied together,
Right.
But
do you
but
think it
that
was
was
just
the
the Greeks
choice
at the time?
Yeah, that was the choice that they made. And as I think through, okay, what would it be like for us if we were celebrating the resurrection 3 days after Passover and that was on a Thursday? That would feel weird because we've always grown up celebrating Easter on Sunday.
Right.
So the Council of Nicaea set stuff in place that ultimately impacts us today. But Easter and Passover are not necessarily synced together. Passover is determined by the Jewish calendar, and the Council of Nicaea set it a different time. It's actually the first Sunday after the new moon, and let me tell you what it says. Easter should be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon in the spring, or after the spring equinox.
Oh, that's interesting. Because somebody actually asked me a couple weeks ago, why does it move? And I could not answer it at the time.
The first full moon, the Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox, because it does change almost a month.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So one more question before we move on from this. But the Sunday.
This is important. Critical.
I know. Why did he actually rise from the dead on a Sunday, or what was the significance?
Yeah. We read in John chapter 20. It says on the first day of the week.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Got it. All right.
Yep.
So I just
it would
wanted
have been on Sunday morning.
So they still wanted to keep the Sunday.
Yes.
Okay.
So it felt like Sunday was the day that they celebrated the resurrection. So for the Christians in the first century, everything really revolved around the first day of the week, because that's when the resurrection had happened.
Do you think that's also why we celebrate our Sabbath on Sunday?
Yeah. Ultimately, it is. So 7 days in a week, that historically was always true. The Sabbath for the Jews would have been the seventh day of the week on Saturday. So Sunday would have always been the first Roman calendar. Saturday on the seventh day of the week. But because Jesus resurrected on the first day of the week, on Sunday, that's always why Christians have gathered and worshiped.
Okay. That's really fun.
Yeah.
See, we're learning.
We're learning, yes.
All right. So there was a really interesting question from Harry Houdini.
Harry Houdini.
I didn't know that he attended church, but
he was here Sunday, apparently.
Yeah, he has a good one. How do you think Jesus got out of those grave wrappings after reviving? And did the angels help him out? Did he muscle his way out? And is the Shroud of Turin legit? I don't know what the Shroud of Turin is.
Oh, cool. Actually, I added that to the question from Mr. Houdini because it all kind of ties together. We don't know exactly whether Jesus, when he came back to life, all the grave clothes just fell off him. Maybe angels helped him. Maybe Jesus just kind of transferred out of them in the same way that he did when he came into the upper room. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. We don't know that for sure. So the Shroud of Turin is a piece of cloth that exists today that has an imprint of a figure in it. A lot of people believe that it's actually the grave clothes of Jesus, that it was the shroud, the cloth that Jesus' body was wrapped in. There's a lot of really interesting things people have tried to prove and disprove its authenticity, because we don't really hear about it for I didn't go back and do research, but like 1,500 years. It doesn't show up until the Middle Ages.
Okay.
And
it's in Jerusalem?
No, it's in Italy. Somebody in Italy has it. Maybe the Catholic Church. I don't know. But the image that is there is it's like a negative photograph. So it shows the figure. It shows the facial features of a man who has all the characteristics that would have happened to Jesus, and it appears as though I'm being careful because I don't know. My faith doesn't depend on whether the Shroud of Turin is authentic or not. It is just really interesting that scientists have said it's like a flash of light created this image on the cloth. They can't figure out why the image is there.
Wow.
but it's like this microburst of energy created this image on the cloth. So
fascinating mystery.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Go ahead and check out the Shroud of Turin stuff, and you make your own call.
Yeah, I wonder how many Googles there'll be after this.
Yeah,
podcast.
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Okay, cool. Well, we have another question. Why didn't Mary and some of the other disciples who were on the road recognize Jesus at first? Did he look like a different person after he rose?
I don't know that Jesus, clearly their last impression of Jesus would have been when he was on the cross, and he would have looked radically different at that point in time. If you go back, it's funny, I just today saw a picture of Mel Gibson with Jim Caviezel when they had filmed The Passion of the Christ, and they have Caviezel is in all of his makeup as he's on the cross. That, it's after that, and his body, his face, everything is literally almost indistinguishable. And so that would have been their last impression of Jesus. Plus, they wouldn't have thought, like I started the message, it was the least expected thing for any of them. It's not like they would have been thinking, oh, it's Jesus in the crowd. And yet there are some times, like when I've been with a group of people or whatever, people I know, my wife, that, you're walking around and you see someone some distance away, and your brain's just kind of in a different place, and you're thinking, who is that? Is that, well, I don't know. And so I think it was just outside of their realm of thinking that it would even be Jesus. And he may have looked different with a transformed body. He may have. We don't know that for sure.
Right.
But I think it was the kind of thing that when he spoke Mary's name, Mary at that point was like, oh, I know who that is. I know that voice. And
she just knew in her spirit.
Yeah. At that point, all the pieces came together.
Right.
Yeah.
That's such a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of think, well, if they looked the same, I would definitely recognize that person, dead or not.
Yeah.
But so I guess I always thought that he had come back with in a different body, maybe, or was trying to transfigure himself, because he wasn't ready to reveal himself. Yeah. But I mean, that was just my interpretation of it.
We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I think I guess I've always thought, because the account from that's in, I think it's in Mark. I didn't go back and look, where the two on the road to Emmaus. Maybe that's in Luke. They walk with him for miles, for 6 miles, and they don't recognize him until he breaks bread. Yeah. I think that they were just they just were not even thinking it was possible, and I think maybe Jesus was wearing different clothes that he wore before, and just had a little bit different kind of appearance. So who knows?
And I mean, God can do anything.
Right.
So if he just wanted to cloud our eyes to what we were really seeing, he could definitely do that.
Absolutely.
Man, this is a fun discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Is it likely that Jesus spoke Greek to his disciples? Or would he have spoken Hebrew or Aramaic, and the Gospels were just written in Greek for the widespread transmission?
So one of the great things about this podcast and the opportunity that people have to ask questions is that there are times that the questions come that it's like, oh, yeah, I really kind of blew that. And as I prepped the message and got ready, when I was delivering it in first service, I thought, shalom is Hebrew. Jesus wouldn't have been speaking Hebrew. He would have been speaking Aramaic. And so my reference to the word shalom was a bad reference, although the truth of that is that shalom, there is this sense of shalom is this, it's a kind of a greeting and this general sense of well-being kind of thing. The word eirene communicates safety and security. That's how it's used. It is peace, but it's not kind of like it's like peace, the opposite of war, kind of a deal. Okay. But Jesus would have said it in Aramaic. And so I actually went back to try and say, okay, what was the word in Aramaic? And at that point, you're kind of thinking, okay, translation from Aramaic to Greek, translation from Greek to English. I would say this. To me, as I studied, I think that it made sense, and I don't think that I'm connecting dots in a wrong way. I think that Jesus was saying, yeah, you're scared. You don't need to be scared because I'm here.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. He wasn't just saying, oh, everything's rainbows and lollipops. He was saying, I'm here. It's okay.
Almost
That's a good
like
question.
the way that you say it, almost like a comforting father.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like, when you're a kid and you have a bad dream and your parents come in and it's like, okay, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Everything is okay.
I mean, that really just describes it perfectly, because I just felt that in my soul, because they would have been so troubled. And to see him, like, that would have just been him comforting them in their grief. And
it's funny because all three services I said the Red Bull line, that they were wired that night. And Red Bull was the only way that I could create an image that worked in my mind, because, I've not ever had a Red Bull, but I know lots of people who have that are like just all a jitter after they've had that, especially at night, whatever. And I think that that's the way that the disciples were, that they gathered together and it's like, what do we do? They're afraid, and yet there's this news that they can't really comprehend. They're just trying to make sense of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely would have been exhausted after a big crash.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Okay. So how could Jesus have entered the room with a locked door when he comes to the disciples? There's a note here that some commentators believe this is why 1 Corinthians 16.
Oh, yeah. Let me talk about that.
Okay.
Actually, this is my question. I set myself up.
It's a good one.
It is one of those things that you think, when I was working on the message early in the week, I said to Deb, what is it in Star Trek when they go to the room and they end up on the planet? They put them in the beam, that transporter room. Was Jesus like transported, teleported, whatever, through the wall? We don't know. We don't know whether he just walked through. We don't know. But it's clear that John is trying to communicate. Jesus got in the room somehow, and the doors were locked. Everything was shut up, and it's one of those things that you think, man, I wish there was some more explanation. Did he just do a Casper the Friendly Ghost and, something? He walked through a solid structure. We don't know. That could be. Who knows?
Just apparated with the flames.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And again, our faith isn't dependent upon the logistics of that.
Right. But
here's what we can tell from what John wrote is that the doors were locked, the room was shut up, Jesus all of a sudden is in the room.
Right.
And they're afraid. The doors are locked because they're afraid of the Jewish leaders. They're afraid of what might happen to them. So that's a really cool thing. Now, the thing that's interesting, the reference in 1 Corinthians 16, it uses a word in the Greek that sometimes you see this on churches, the word Maranatha, which is a Greek word that means come quickly, Lord, come quickly. And some of the commentators that I read said that Jesus appearing in this room is kind of what prompted Paul to write, and for the Corinthians to say, Lord, come quickly. It's like, God, come right here in this room with the door shut, come right now, Maranatha, which is a different kind of thing than an expectation to say, Jesus, come quickly, like return, do your second coming. It's they had this sense of that would happen, but that Jesus would be in the room with them as well, which is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So the next question: what's the opposite of doubt?
This is one of those things that it just really didn't have a chance to make it into the message because I really wanted to talk about. So Thomas is doubting. We talked about doubting Thomas, that phrase. Mm-hmm. Thomas says, unless I touch his hands, unless I put my hand in his side, I won't believe. And Jesus says, stop doubting and believe. I was thinking, okay, what's the opposite of doubt? And I think that it is this sense of confidence and assurance that they had after the doubt was gone. So not just Thomas, but all of the disciples, after they had seen Jesus, after they had talked with him, after he had fixed them breakfast on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, that there was this unshakable truth that no matter what, no one could convince them of anything except Jesus was alive, that he had conquered death. They had seen him crucified, and it's one of those things that you can't go back and say, nah, maybe not. After they had that interaction, it was just the opposite, and it changed their lives. It fundamentally changed what they did. The same group of people that ran away when the mob came to arrest Jesus, all were martyred. Historians, church history tell us that they were all martyred for their faith because they couldn't deny the fact that Jesus was alive.
Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
When you talk about that assurance and that certainty, they just had this unwavering faith.
Yep.
And for people who are even skeptical of, is this story real? Is the gospel real? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? I mean, when you're talking about that they were all martyred for their faith, I feel like that gives us this that truth that we're looking for, that why would somebody to the point of death just uphold that this is true? This was my eyewitness account. This is what I would believe to the point of death.
Yeah, and when I talked in the message about, let me just preface that to say this: when Jesus really gets hold of your life and things change, you have that sense of confidence and assurance. Notwithstanding, there are still moments of doubt. Like I said, for me, there have been a number of times that I've thought, have I made a mistake in terms of what I founded my life on? And that it doesn't take very long at all before there is the sense of, no, this is absolutely true, regardless of what I feel, regardless of what I'm going through. It's absolutely true. We can count on it. We know that it's true. And that's that confidence and assurance that comes.
Yeah. I think that there's also goodness and there's a place for doubt as well. I think that, God wants us to have curiosity and maybe even, what would you say to that? Maybe even doubt to a degree. I think that would be growth for us.
I think questions, asking legitimate questions that's a really important process. One of the things, I don't know if you've seen it on the internet, when you see a Northpointe ad come up, one of the things that we use to describe it, it's a safe place to ask questions. It's a safe place to have doubt. You're not going to get beat up for saying, I don't think that's true. That's okay, because that's an honest analysis, because I believe that if you honestly consider the claims of Jesus and really sort through that, you have to deliberately choose to ignore a whole lot of stuff to say it's not true. And that if you're just looking at the facts, if you're just looking at the information that's available, it can only lead you to the truth that Jesus was a real person who was born in Judea, who lived for 33 years, who was crucified and resurrected, and people's lives were changed as a result of that. I don't think that when you look at all the evidence, you can land in any other place than that. But you have to think through that on your own, not just say, oh, Rick thinks that, so I think that too.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. If you're truly searching for truth, right, you can just trust that you will find the truth.
Yep. Yep.
Well,
Which ties into the whole point in the message that Jesus did exactly for what Thomas asked for. Thomas had said to the other disciples, unless I touch his hands, unless I put my hand in his side. And Jesus comes to him and says, touch my hands, put your hand in our side. That's not true for everybody, but I think there is this sense of when we authentically pray, God, I need you to show me this. And it's not the kind of thing that we're saying, oh, heal my grandma, or turn this blue wall green. Not that kind of thing. But when we seriously say, God, I need to know, God, that's a prayer that God responds to. Doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah. I think we have a little bit of time left. Do you want to add, you talked about Thomas in the message, and you made it seem like you had some things that you were ready to bring for us. So I'm curious about what you learned about Thomas.
So when I prepped the message, I really wanted to focus on those last 10 verses or whatever of John 20 and focus on Thomas because the story of Thomas is incredible. But the resurrection is about Jesus. It's not about Thomas. So I kept going back and forth, and I knew because of the 3 services, my time was limited. So anyway, here's all the stuff that didn't make it in the message about Thomas. So we tend to think about Thomas as a doubter, and we miss the previous interactions that are in Scripture that describe Thomas when he's one of the disciples. The first time that we see it is when Mary and Martha send word to Jesus that Lazarus, that their brother is sick, and they want him to come and heal him. Mm-hmm. And Jesus hangs out and keeps doing stuff, and Lazarus dies. But Jesus says, he eventually says, okay, it's time for us to go take care of Lazarus in Bethany, which is right near to Jerusalem. And the disciples say, you don't want to go back there. Last time you were there, they were ready to kill you. And Jesus finally says, look, Lazarus has fallen asleep. That's what he says first. And then he says, no, look, Lazarus is dead, and we need to go take care of him. And Thomas says, this is in John chapter 11, verse 16. Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, okay, let's go so that we can die with Jesus. That's a statement of incredible faith. You know, that Thomas is saying, no, we have seen Jesus. We know Jesus. I'm ready to go die. I'm ready to go give my life for him, with him as he gets executed. That's not the picture of Thomas we tend to think of. We tend to think of the doubting Thomas. And it's in that context when Jesus is there, and this is one of those things that I just wish could have made it in the message. It's after, when Jesus is ready to heal Lazarus, that Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will never die, which is an Easter message, but it just didn't make it in the message. Yeah. So that's John 11. In John 14, there's a passage that's there that, like, I use in most funerals that I do, where Jesus says, in my Father's house are many mansions. Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. If that weren't so, I wouldn't tell you that. That's all in John 14, and Jesus says at the end of that, he says, you know the way that I'm going. And Thomas says, time out. We don't know where you're going. We have no idea where you're going. How can we know the way? And that's when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Both of those scriptures are famous things that Jesus said, that I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and that Jesus said, I'm the resurrection and the life. Mm-hmm. Those happen in a relatively short period of time, and Thomas prompts both of those, which is just really, really interesting, or Thomas is involved in those. So that's kind of the background that we have for Thomas that leads up to this interaction that happens after the resurrection, and they're just kind of the opposite of what we think in terms of doubting Thomas. We think, oh, Thomas must be this wimpy little guy that, whatever. Not the case at all. So then fast forward and you get out of Scripture and say, okay, what happened to Thomas afterwards? And there's a combination of, when you look at archaeology, at church history, at kind of regional history and oral tradition, the best case that we can come up with, the best sense that we have, is that Thomas went first into Persia and preached about Jesus there, and then from Persia he went down through the Arabian Sea and traveled down almost on a missionary journey like Paul to southwestern India, and he lands in India in an area that's close to the area of Kerala. Kerala, India. He's there on the southwest side of India and preaches there and converts people to Jesus. And then he ends up either going around the bottom of India or over across land to the southeastern side of India to an area called Chennai. And
did he have any other disciples with him?
He's by himself, because
okay.
so when this is kind of a lead into next message, because the new series that starts this week is about the Great Commission. So they go to the uttermost parts of the earth. Thomas really is like at the end of the world at this point in time, but he's on the southeastern side of India and preaching, planting churches there. And Thomas, interestingly enough, is martyred when he is speared in his side with a spear, which is just kind of interesting that he would say, unless I put my hand in your side, where Jesus had been poked with a spear, had been speared, and ultimately that's how Thomas died. So that's what oral tradition, church history tell us. Archaeology then, so now fast forward, so that's all first century stuff. Thomas probably went to India in about 52 AD. So that's 30 years after the resurrection is where he's there, and that he's in India roughly about 20 years and dies somewhere around 72 AD. Fast forward a whole bunch of years, in the 1500s, the Portuguese come to India. So they travel from Portugal. Think if you visualize the map of Europe and stuff, the Portuguese come to India. And in India, they find followers of Jesus that are called Thomas Christians.
Oh.
Which is
incredible,
because it's 1,500 years later, but there are these pockets of Christians who, in their oral tradition, say, yeah, Thomas came. And Thomas is the patron saint of India. I didn't know that. Yeah. And so there is this sense that for Christians who are in India, that their religious heritage, their lineage, their forefathers go back to Thomas, doubting Thomas, which is really, really fun. So now one more piece in terms of the connection. In 1912, archaeologists found on a granite column, they found a recessed symbol that's, this is in Anuradhapura. I think I'm saying that right. Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka. They found this column that was granite that recessed in there is this Persian cross that's now known as the Anuradhapuran cross. That is a combination of the cross and Persia in Sri Lanka, which is off the tip of India, and a Christian symbol that's there as well that dates back to the 6th century. Mm-hmm. So disciples of Jesus, who would have been the descendants of Thomas, preaching and conversion, make it to Sri Lanka. So for me, when I'm reading about this and thinking, this is just so interesting, because we were in Sri Lanka just this past fall. We as a church support Laminda and Denise. Laminda is actually going to preach in 2 weeks. They're here in the U.S. right now, coming to Michigan just in the next week or so, and going to be staying here on property with us, which is really, really fun. So the Anuradhapura connection in Sri Lanka was interesting. When I talked about Kerala, India, the church that I was at before coming to Northpointe, one of the missions that we supported was Kerala Christian Mission, and I met the guy who started the mission, a guy named Rajan Ipe, who became a follower of Jesus in Kerala through the influence of an American who was there, which just really, really cool story. So there's that connection for me when I'm reading about Thomas. And then in Chennai, there's a Bible college in Chennai. Chennai Bible College is, I think, what it's called. And the person who helped start the Bible college is a guy named Leonard Thompson, who actually is in Chennai now. He's a native Indian, and he was on staff with me at Ozark Christian College. He was the missionary in residence, and he and his wife went to the college that I went to, that Larry went to, and one of his best friends from college was at the church that I served in Maryland. So for me, the whole thing with Thomas was like, this is just really fun how in God's economy he brings people and webs of stories and stuff together to match all that up.
As you're diving in, he's
Yeah.
showing you all of these
Yeah.
layers and opening it up.
Yeah.
It really becomes something tangible for you.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot when we actually get into scripture and we start reading the Bible. The Holy Spirit does that for us. He shows us those connections of how
Yeah.
it means something to us. So that's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just was really, really fun. Yeah, I think that's probably all I got.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you were able to give us some more information on Thomas and what his life looked like a little bit after. So it was fun context.
I would just say this: don't walk away from the message thinking negatively of Thomas. I think my big takeaway was Thomas was a guy of incredible faith. His willingness to die with Jesus, his willingness, to me, one of the most significant parts of the message was that Thomas, even though he doubted, he didn't walk away. You know, that he could have said, "You guys are crazy, and I wasn't there. You don't know what you're talking about," and he could have just left. Lots of people that happens to. They have maybe a negative interaction with God. Their impression of God is. And
Jesus doesn't keep us on the line for things that we've done that go against him. He doesn't hold on to our sin and say that one time.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of funny that we would continuously hold on to that for Thomas.
Yeah,
the
that you
one
have this
thing.
phrase, the doubting Thomas.
Yeah.
But because God clearly used him
Right.
to impact the nations of India and Sri Lanka, at least in ways
And we
that
can
still
still see that
2,000
today.
years later, there's still evidence of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to think that could be part of our story
Right.
too, you know?
Yeah, you don't know how God will use you to impact other people, other families, other nations. We won't know that till eternity.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Miss Chris.
This was a great talk. So for everyone who listened, just know God is using you, and that is amazing. You don't know how he's using you to affect the people around you. So talk about him and talk about him often and spread his love. And if you're tuned in, thank you for watching. Please come back next week. We have a new series starting.
New series that I think the title of the series is Your Turn.
Oh, hopefully it's not my turn.
Yeah, hopefully it is your
okay.
turn. Yeah.
But please like us, subscribe, go onto YouTube, Spotify. There's a new app out there, so download it if you have Android.
It's on Droid now, so you can download it.
Good, yeah. If you were having phone troubles before, because I was able to get the app now, you can re-download the app for Android, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.